Hello, everyone, and welcome to a yet-to-be-named podcast. If we hit 20 likes on this video, we'll name the podcast. We promise. We're coming to you from Upstate, South Carolina in association with the Upstate, South Carolina Democratic Socialists of America. I'm Jeremy, and this is my associate,
Charles.
And we're here to talk about deportations and then do everyone's favorite thing, define terms. Don't click off. It'll be fun. We promise it'll be fun.
The defining terms is actually pretty interesting. Yeah.
It'll be interesting. We promise.
Trust.
Okay. So, to start off, we're going to talk about the current situation with Ábrego García. Charles, you don't know a ton about this situation right now, right?
No. I've heard bits and pieces from, family and friends, but not much.
Alright, so I'm going to try and walk you through the story of this man who has been deported for no reason. They just kind of deported him.
That's fun.
Okay, so to start off, he was from El Salvador, and he immigrated to the United States to escape the Salvadorian gangs, right? He specifically didn't want that gang life. He
wasn't about that life.
No.
I get that.
Okay, this is... Alright. No, but genuinely, there's a lot of violence. He was trying to escape that violence. He immigrated to the United States. He entered the country illegally when he was 16, but then he applied for asylum, which is a, human right. And the judge said, nah, you don't get asylum, but if we send you back to El Salvador, you're probably going to get, murdered by gangs. So we're going to not do that. You can, live here and you can work here. It's fine because it'd be a threat to your life if we sent you back.
Yo, hold on. So, what's that called? That's not asylum, but that sounds exactly like what asylum is.
Yeah, but it's not asylum, technically.
Okay.
He didn't get asylum.
That sound... You just defined asylum.
No, it's not asylum. It's technically not asylum, but because there's a credible threat to his life if he goes back to El Salvador, it would be not okay to send him back to El Salvador. So they decided...
Okay, we'll just roll with it.
He gets to stay here.
Okay.
It's not... I don't know why it's not asylum, but it's not asylum legally. So then he married a United States citizen. He had a child with her, and and together they raised the two other children he had from a previous relationship. And then the government grabbed him and deported him and shipped him off in a plane with a bunch of Venezuelan accused gang members who were supposedly part of Tren de Aragua, although there's no actual evidence that they were part of Tren de Aragua.
And that's that gang, right? It's a Salvadorian...
No.
Okay.
Tren de Aragua is the Venezuelan gang.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah. He was here to escape Salvadorian gangs.
Oh,
Different
okay,
gangs.
I see.
Then while the planes were in the air, Judge Boasberg issued an injunction saying, hey, due process is important. You really can't just ship people to El Salvador. That's kind of a fucked up thing to do.
And what did the administration say about that?
They said, yeah, you're right. We're going to turn those planes around. No. They said the planes are in international waters, which means you no longer have jurisdiction.
Have no say.
Yeah, exactly.
Damn.
To which the judge's response was, yeah, but I have jurisdiction over you, and I'm telling you to turn the planes around. But the administration was just like, nah. And so they just sent him to El Salvador anyway.
Is he in one of those prisons, or is he just chilling?
Nah, he's in a prison. Nah, they sent him to a prison. Around this time, they made a propaganda video where they had a backing track of music and did basically a freaking edit of the Salvadorian prison camp.
Fire.
So that's pretty cool. Then after that, the administration admitted it was an administrative error that Ábrego García got deported. They were just oops, our bad. However, and so people were like, okay, bring him back then. And they were like, well, he's in El Salvador now. Oopsies, nothing we can do. This is despite the fact that Donald Trump is paying El Salvador to keep the people there. So he very clearly does have the power to bring him back in this scenario. but he's saying it's out of my hands now because he just wants him to stay there. Also, despite the fact that politicians went down to El Salvador and did like photo shoots with the prisoners, so clearly they like could bring him back.
What's the like benefit of, for the Trump administration, what's the benefit of this man staying in the El Salvador prison?
Yeah. Okay, so what they're trying to establish is that the laws that apply here in the United States and the due process that applies here in the United States doesn't extend to El Salvador. So anyone they send to El Salvador, they can now do whatever they want to, and our like processes and like constitutional rights don't apply to anyone who gets shipped to El Salvador, which would allow them to just ship their political opponents to El Salvador and then be like, well, they're in El Salvador, laws don't matter anymore.
And and I'll talk more about the history of that later on.
Yeah. Okay, so then the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in favor of the judge, saying, hey, you gotta bring back this man. You can't just ship a man for no reason to El Salvador and then just keep him in El Salvador. There was a minor kerfuffle around the words effectuate versus facilitate in this thing that I'm not really gonna get into. But essentially what it came out to was you've got to bring him back. Then the administration says, hey, this is a national security matter. So you don't have jurisdiction. Screw you.
Well, how is it a national... How do they justify that? Do they just not?
Now, their justification is that, these gangs are a threat to national security, and immigration is a threat to national security. It's an quote-unquote invasion of immigrants.
Okay.
And so, it's a national security matter to stop that invasion.
Okay.
The court ruled against them, said, nah, you can't do that. At this point, Judge Zinnes, who was the judge specifically for Garcia, as opposed to Judge Boasberg, who was a judge for the, broader Venezuelan plane crisis, said, you need to give us daily updates and daily reports on where he is and what you're doing to give him back, to bring him back to the United States, right? To which the United States government said, it's a state secret. It's super secret. We can't tell you anything about what's going on. It's a national secret. This is somewhat ironic given the aforementioned photo shoots and the aforementioned propaganda video of the inside of the prison that they did, but it's fine. 1 second. And then at this point, the administration used this crazy tactic called stalling like crazy. So they said, so she was like, okay, here's a deadline for when you need to bring him back. And then they were like, oh no, we've already passed that deadline, better give us a new deadline. And then she gave them a new deadline, and they were like, that deadline's way too soon. You gotta push that deadline back. And they just continued stalling and stalling and stalling and stalling. Currently, Judge Boasberg is charging them for contempt of court because, they're just...
Not doing what the court ordered.
Not doing what the court ordered, which is pretty clearly contempt of court.
Yeah.
And very recently, as of time of recording, I think at 1 a.m. yesterday, the court ordered they couldn't ship anyone else to El Salvador without due process. So this was very much an emergency ruling. The courts are really trying to stop the flow of bleeding here. And what we're seeing here is a conflict between the executive branch and the judicial branch that's leading to issues, because generally the way the government is supposed to work is the judicial branch passes rulings and then the executive branch carries out the judicial rulings. But what we're seeing here is that the executive branch is just saying, nuh-uh, I'm just not going to carry out the judicial rulings, which leaves the judiciary without much actual power. Because,
like what can they do?
Right, they can say, you're doing this, this is what the Constitution says, but if the executive branch is just going to say, nuh-uh, and just not do anything, there's not much they can do. So that's the majority of the Garcia case. I did want to bring up another important thing, which is the homegrown scandal. Oh, actually, wait. one other thing on the Garcia case. So there was a recent photo shoot with a politician where they attempted to make Garcia look really comfortable, which led to something called Margarita-gate, where essentially they, in the middle of a photo shoot, put, like, planted margaritas that
in his, like, prison cell, right?
Yeah. Well, no. They took him out of his prison cell for the photo shoot to make it look like he was really comfortable. Mm-hmm. And then they put margaritas, and the margarita in front of Garcia had, like, a lot less liquid in it, right? To make it look like he drunk from it. But the thing about margaritas is they've got salt around the rim, right?
Yeah, but there was no gap in the salt.
Yes, if you look at the salt went all the way around. Yeah. There was no gap in the salt. So they fully did just plant a half-drunk margarita next to, or maybe martini. I need to
it would be a margarita, I think.
Margarita. Yeah. In front of Garcia to try and make it look like he was having a better time there than it was, and that they didn't send him to a prison camp, and that he was comfortable.
Did he, like, agree to those photos, like, or was he just forced into taking those?
I'm not quite sure, unfortunately.
Well, I guess there's not much information coming out from him.
So. Yeah, we don't actually have much information from him. Okay, the other thing I want to cover is the homegrown crisis going on right now. So essentially, while on Hot Mic, and also I believe to an interviewer, Trump's told the president of El Salvador, when he was meeting with him, that he needed to get more prisons because they were doing homegrowns next. Mm-hmm. And he also said that we've got, like, such terrible homegrown criminals here. We've got people who push old women out in front of trains. We should deport those people to El Salvador and send them to Salvadorian prisons.
Which I trust he has no legitimate examples of any of these people.
Oh, no, of course not. Facts. Facts? No. So he's looking into, he said he was quote-unquote looking into the legality, but so far everything he's done has flown in the face of the Constitution and flown in the face of legality, so I would greatly doubt that that's actually something he's doing, or that he cares about the legality of it. And it's also really worrying given how much they've thrown around the label terrorist, and given that they were probably going to say, okay, we're going to deport terrorists because they're a threat to national security.
It's not like, the Trump encouraged, a coup on the United States.
Yeah, no, that's not terrorism.
4 years ago. That's not terrorism.
That's not terrorism.
That's expressing their right to free speech.
Exactly. However, you know what is terrorism? Saying you don't like Tesla, or that you don't like Israel, or that you're boycotting anything ever.
Yeah.
Also, they recently said that if you look at the Garcia case, a case in which the United States government claimed it to be an administrative error, and you say that he's innocent, you are aiding and abetting terrorism. So terrorism really is just anyone who hurts the Trump administration's feelings. They have changed their tune recently, by the way, on that whole administrative error thing. They're now claiming he was part of MS-13, despite a serious dearth of evidence that he was part of MS-13. But yeah, if you now go against that new narrative, you are now aiding and abetting terrorism.
So us?
Yeah, so we're aiding and abetting terrorism right now.
Listen to that, Trump administration. Please don't lock us up.
No, we love...
We love y'all.
We
love,
trust. Tesla, and we would never do a boycott.
Musk.
And Elon Musk.
I kiss my picture of Elon Musk every night before I go to bed.
Yep, this man who specifically fled gangs was definitely part of MS-13.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this would completely fly in the face of due process, but who cares about that? Anyway, yeah, so it's very concerning that he's just like, yeah, anyone who criticizes the regime or criticizes Israel, we're just going to send him to El Salvador, and then they can die in a Salvadorian death camp. I'm doing great right now.
So you mentioned how the executive branch just isn't listening to the judicial branch, and how the executive branch carries out the orders of the judicial branch.
Yeah.
So are like police forces under the control of the executive branch? Is like do you know that, or
I do not. I believe so. I think that's part of the executive branch. I mean, I know obviously. Yeah, you can look that up. Actually, we have Google.
Yes.
1 second. A second will edit out in post. Yes.
Yes.
Police forces are part of the executive branch. I presume ICE is also a part of the executive branch.
I would assume any law enforcement would be part of the executive
all
branch.
the people with actual power to physically do things in the real world, instead of just doing things by like precedent, are part of the executive branch, which means it's kind of a problem when the executive branch is just kind of going rogue, which is what we're seeing here.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know, the president is also part of the executive branch. I feel like most people know that, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I just wanted to specify.
This he's using what was it? The Alien Enemies Act.
Enemies Act
to justify
this, which I think you know,
Yeah.
or you've done some research into. So tell us about the Alien and Sedition Acts.
They were created by the John Adams administration a really, really freaking long time ago. Like,
this was one of the first few administrations, right?
It was the third, right? Yeah.
I think so. Wait, let me type. My typing's quieter.
Yeah, it was 1798.
Yeah.
Or 1789. I cannot speak, y'all.
Yeah. Like very long ago, close to the beginning, close to the founding of this country.
And there were 4 acts that were passed that year, that were like grouped together under this category. The first one was the Neutralization Act, which basically made it more difficult for immigrants to gain citizenship. You had to stay in here for a long time, and you had to have you had to have been a lawful citizen. Or you had to have lawful residence. Sorry, not a lawful citizen. It still applies today because now, you have to be a lawful resident. You have to have a green card to qualify for citizenship. And then also, the next one is the Alien Friends Act, which basically means the sitting president can imprison any citizen who's deemed to be a threat to public safety, which is
cool.
pretty concerning.
Very concerning, I'd say.
We might be considered threats to public safety.
You also might be considered threats to public safety.
The listener, might be considered.
If you're not, MAGA, basically.
Yeah,
Even if you're like a Republican, if you're not a big Trump Republican.
Yeah, if you're like a 2016 Lindsey Graham Republican, then you're kind of cooked as well.
Yeah.
Which also means, he's also outsource. He's, as Jeffrey mentioned. Jeremy.
We haven't known each other for much time.
We're new friends.
Exactly.
As Jeremy mentioned, there's a lot of, they're basically outsourcing the prisons so that so that they don't have to follow, human rights or what the U.S. courts say.
Lame.
Stuff like that. And so, it's concerning that they can just, imprison anyone and, ship them to El Salvador. That's cool. Yeah. The second to last one is the Sedition Act, which criminalizes any scandalous or malicious statements against the federal government. So, you know, basically...
Criticism of the government.
Yeah, which basically...
It's just illegal
yeah,
now.
Yeah, so apparently our current administration isn't allowing free speech.
Yeah.
That's cool. You know, I'm all for that, bro. You know, just keep it up. It's kind of terrifying. We can't if he reinstates this.
Yeah.
You know, if he reinstates this, then we can't, you know, criticize the U.S. government.
Can I talk about the states' rights thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Also, fun fact about this whole Alien and Sedition Act thing. So in response specifically to fear over these acts and the acts that, the power that these acts gave the incumbent party, Thomas Jefferson actually created the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which are the first instance of states' rights rhetoric. So, Republicans, if you actually care about states' rights, what Trump is doing is literally the thing states' rights were created to fight against.
He is centralizing power in the federal government.
Yes, this is huge. Like, this is giving a ton of power to the federal government.
He's just, yeah.
Yeah.
And the last one, and the one that Trump is using now, is the Alien Enemies Act, which allows the deportation and imprisonment of any immigrant from a hostile nation.
Which Venezuela's not. We're not at war with Venezuela.
But he can you know.
He's pretending. He's saying the gangs from there count as an invasion.
Yeah, he's saying that they have quote unquote invaded us.
Yeah,
and
which,
you know,
not how invasions work typically.
Yeah,
you know. But
generally they happen to be like militaries.
Yeah, exactly. Normally you don't just send random civilians. To live peacefully in a place. Not normally how an invasion works, but you know, what do I know?
Not just like normal dudes, you know.
Yeah.
And he also used this a lot in his first term when we were involved in Afghanistan to deport people of Arab descent. You know, which is the Alien Enemies Act is kind of where all of his justification for the cruelty against Americans
right.
Has come from. And some other examples of where this has been used in the past was during World War II when Roosevelt signed an executive order after Pearl Harbor to round up and imprison I think it was 150,000 Japanese Americans.
Notably, these weren't just Japanese immigrants, right?
Yeah,
it was anyone of Japanese descent.
Yeah, so it could be, you know, you could have had people living there for like 8 generations, but
if you were Japanese,
you could be rounded up and put in these literal concentration camps. Not in the way that, I'm not justifying this in any means, but not in the way that we look at the Nazi concentration camps, more in the fact that they were camps to concentrate the people, you know. They were not death camps. Which,
no, they were not as bad as the Nazi concentration
but
camps.
Still horrible.
But they were still terrible.
Yes.
Like, it's a blight on our history that we did this to Japanese Americans.
Yeah. And I could see something like this reoccurring if, you know, except instead of, you know, keeping the concentration camps within the United States, he'll just outsource it to El Salvador, and they can do whatever they want. You know, I also find it ironic that the Trump administration refuses to outsource labor, but outsourcing human rights violations is okay.
It is really funny. What happened to our domestic human rights abuses?
I know.
You know?
Yeah. What the great American domestic human rights violations.
Exactly. The human rights industry, the human rights violation industry, is going to be destroyed. By
It was such a good institution.
So many good jobs. lives in the United States.
Yeah, cutting off fingers and
exactly.
Yeah, who's gonna
now? All the El Salvadorians are gonna get it.
Yeah, I don't want these El Salvadorians to cut off my fingers and toes. Like,
no,
what?
I want a homegrown American boy
Yeah.
to do it. Yeah. Okay. If you're done, I'm gonna get into everyone's favorite part of our broadcast: defining terms. Defining terms.
Yeah.
Okay, I promise this will be interesting. So we wanted to define some political terms that have been thrown around a lot recently, and we think a lot of people don't actually have a good grasp on what these terms mean. So we thought it'd be helpful to run through the definitions of them for all of you today. Okay, so let's start with our first one: socialism. So how would you say the normal American would define socialism?
Them damn commies. No. I would say I've actually heard a lot of people compare socialism to Nazism.
Yes. Okay, I want to be very clear about this point, actually. Socialism and Nazism are very different. The Nazis put socialist in their name to attract workers to their movement, because they were a very populist movement. They were trying to be, hey, we hate the elites, we're anti-elite, we're the working man. And so they put socialism in their name to attract people to their movement. But they hated communists. They were vehemently anti-communist.
Like, hundreds of thousands of communists were murdered.
Yeah, they made the first concentration camp for communists. They were anti-labor, they hated trade unions, they crushed trade unions. There's that famous poem, first they came for the socialists and I said nothing, then they came for the trade unionists and I said nothing. And it goes that way because first they came for the socialists,
yes,
and then they came for the trade unionists. And there were a couple vestiges of socialism in the Nazi movement, and all those people were killed on the Night of Long Knives, where they went through and they got rid of any actual socialist part of their party. So by the time they got into full swing, there wasn't really any socialism left. They just used socialism and then discarded it as soon as they didn't need it anymore. There was no actual wanting to make things better for workers. They lied, they're Nazis. They can lie. So what is socialism actually? I would define socialism pretty simply as the democratization of the economy. Currently, we have...
Here, break that down.
I'm gonna break that down. I'm gonna break that down. So currently, our political sphere is run basically democratically, right? I mean, it doesn't always function great, but in theory, it's run democratically. You elect your leaders do whatever, that's great. However, you don't spend all your time in the political sphere. Most people spend a ton of their time at work, in their jobs, in the economic sphere. And
in fact, I would say most of people's lives is spent at their jobs.
Exactly. And the economic sphere is not run democratically at all. In fact,
it's run hierarchically.
Yeah, it's run intensely hierarchically. Oftentimes, it's run pretty closely to a freaking monarchy where
one guy rules.
One guy rules, and when that guy dies, his son takes his job. So yeah, you are not in a democratic relation with your boss. You do not elect your boss. Your boss tells you what to do, and you have to do it, and you don't really have a say in that matter unless you want to lose your job. So socialism would be a move towards making the economy and making your job more democratic. And there's two main ways of doing that. The first one, and don't get scared, is for the government to take a larger role in the economy. The idea here is not we give all the power to the government and then the government takes control of the economy and then it's literally 1984. The idea is that the government would stay democratic and we'd have an actually democratic government, and so then by giving control of the economy to the government, the people, broadly, would be able to decide how the economy functions so that the economy functions in service of the people the best. Then the other main way is basically unions but harder. We make it so instead of the government having control, we just make it so that all the laborers are organized, and all the corporations are run like democracies, where everyone gets an equal say, instead of the corporations, again, being run intensely hierarchically.
Mm-hmm.
Communism. Okay, communism has a couple major parts to it, so I'm going to explain all those.
And when most Americans think of communism, they normally think of what the USSR, like the USSR, China, North Korea,
Stalin,
that type of thing. Stalinist communism.
Right, which claims to be communism, but isn't really seeking to achieve the goals of communism, as we'll see.
North Korea, kinda.
Sort Okay, anyway, so, what are the goals of communism? Firstly, private property is abolished. So, private property, I wanted to define, private property and personal property are different. So, personal property is your stuff, like your toothbrush, your underwear, all that, right? Private property is specifically stuff that can make you money. So, like, a factory would be private property.
A house?
Sort of. It depends.
Yeah, I wanted to make that clear.
A house can be private property if you're renting it out, right?
Oh, if you're... Okay, but what if, like... Well, I guess there wouldn't be a housing market, so... Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so, this means that nobody is making money just by owning stuff. If you want to make money, you've got to go out and make a thing, or go out and do some work, or go out and entertain people. You can't just say own a factory and then you get a part of the proceeds of everything that comes out of that factory. You've got to work in the factory if you want to make money. There's also the idea of to each according to his ability, to each according to his need. So what this means is that everyone does the work they're able to do, and everyone gets what they need. So we don't let anyone starve. We don't let anyone, die of a preventable illness.
But everyone does work to
everyone does work. You don't just have freeloaders, basically. I don't like to say the word, but you know what I mean. But also, like, if you're disabled, we take that into account. You do the work that you can do, and you do the work that you're good at.
According to his
your ability. If you're freaking great at making boats, go be a boat maker, I don't know. Now, this distribution of labor and of resources can be done by the state, but it doesn't have to be for it to be communism. It's not... Communism is not just state control of the economy. In fact, the eventual goal of communism was a stateless society. Karl Marx, who's kind of the progenitor, believed that the state would wither away once true communism was established. So once we get rid of private property and once we make everyone equal, the state will shrivel up. There won't be a need for a state anymore. This leads to the eventual actual goal, which I'm going to state clearly, the creation of a stateless, classless, moneyless society. So there's no state, and everyone's equal. Notably, what's missing from that list is godless. Marx wasn't a big fan of religion because he thought it, inspired people to inaction. He thought it kept them from doing what needed to be done. But there have been a ton of Christian communists. Oftentimes they're motivated by their Christianity. I personally believe there's a lot in the Bible that suggests a communist outlook. And so there's definitely, if you're a Christian, that doesn't mean you can't be a communist or can't be a socialist. There's a long history of Christian communists and Christian socialists.
And I think the Bible often talks about, accepting everyone.
Well, and also giving away
giving
to
money
the poor.
to the poor.
Yeah, giving. I mean, it even says giving away. I think as people had need, and also talks about how Jesus's followers held everything in common. So there's definitely evidence for that kind of outlook in the Bible. Yeah. Oh, also, I do want to address. So, if it's supposed to be a stateless society, why do so many quote unquote communist societies like the USSR end up so authoritarian-y? Basically, the idea theoretically behind that is that the state gains control of the economy real quick, makes the economy communist, and then they'll wither away and die. In practice, oftentimes this doesn't really happen, especially if the state doesn't stay democratic. If the state becomes authoritarian in nature, often the authoritarian state will just stick around and continue to say, sure, we're going to establish communism any time now, and then just use that as a cover to keep going. But this isn't going to happen for sure because of communism. It's just that sometimes authoritarian movements will use communism as an excuse for why they're around. But if the state remains democratic, there's no reason why that should happen. You know?
Yeah.
All right. Next up, anarchism. What does our Joe Schmo American think when he hears?
I don't think most people know what anarchism means.
That is true.
I think that people like associate it with like just anyone can go out and rape and murder as much as they want.
Yeah, chaos, fire,
what's a
it's
riots.
It's like Fortnite.
Yeah. America Battle Royale.
Yeah. Last one standing wins. Okay, so I think a lot of the reason for that kind of break between the actual goals and beliefs of anarchists and the scary associations with the word anarchism is because anarchy has kind of two meanings. The first one being chaos. Whoa. I don't know what that noise was. Chaos. Everything's crazy. The other one, stemming from the root, whatever language it's a root of, is no rule, which is what anarchists want. Is they ideally want no one to be ruling over anyone else. So anarchists seek the destruction of all unjust hierarchies, right? So this means capitalism. Don't listen to the libertarians and the quote-unquote anarcho-capitalists. Capitalism is an unjust hierarchy. It is an unnecessary institution which places some people in greater positions of power over others arbitrarily. And so anarchists seek to get rid of that, but also, like, the state. That's an arbitrary thing that places some people over others. Racial hierarchies, gender hierarchies, all those kind of things. Notably, there are some things that anarchists would consider just hierarchies. This would be like teacher-student is a hierarchy, but that's not arbitrary. That's one that makes sense and is valid, right? The teacher has more knowledge than the student.
Theoretically, that student could grow up and become a teacher, and
exactly.
the hierarchy can shift if
exactly. Same thing with like parent-child, right? But those are all ones that happen for a good reason, and so we call those justified.
Yes.
I want to establish again, because often this is not said, they don't just want to get rid of the state. They want to get rid of all unjust hierarchies. There's also a major prefigurative aspect to anarchism that's often skipped over, where anarchism isn't just destroying things, it's not just breaking down hierarchies, it's also building alternatives to capitalism. So that'd be things like creating mutual aid networks, creating community gardens, making things that allow communities to operate autonomously, independent of the greater capitalist system and the state system and all of that system-y stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, our last one. This is a pretty important one right now. Fascism. So, fascism. This is what the Nazis were. Fascism is an authoritarian political ideology, and it's rooted in the idea that one nation or state or race is always going to dominate. And so you want it to be your nation or state or race. And because of that, a strongman dictator is considered necessary, because liberalism is weak and democracy is weak, and so we need a big strong man to come save us and help us dominate everyone else.
Can I relate this to our current administration?
Yes, you can relate this to our current administration.
Trump saying like, we need to make America great again, is saying, hey y'all, we need to work on being better than these other countries. Look how bad we're doing in comparison to these guys. We need to do better. We need to be the dominant force in the world again.
And it also ties into another core aspect of fascism, which is the mythic past.
Yes.
Fascists almost always say there was another time when we were great and we were dominating, and we need to return to that. That's why Hitler called his administration the Third Reich. That's why Mussolini cared so much about Rome, and they all were like big fetishists for ancient history, is because they want to, there's this idea of wanting to return to a past time when we were the dominating force.
Mm-hmm.
Which isn't...
Even if the First and Second Reich were never even a dominating force in Europe.
No, but the idea behind hammering home we're the Third Reich is that the First and Second Reich were great and dominating, and so we're going to be like them.
Yeah,
and that's why it's
better.
A mythic past.
Yeah,
because we were never even like, I don't know, America never really was. Is that hot take?
I don't think
America kind of sucks.
I don't think so. I don't think there was ever a time that we can truly say this is when America was great. Like even in the 40s, there was we were we stopped the spreading of fascism. We we created huge scientific leaps and bounds, but we also dropped 2 suns on Japan. We we still had segregation. We still had all this stuff, and that was pretty recently. And when was America great?
Yeah, and also, I mean, if you're just going by power, which is what they care about,
mm-hmm.
we're kind of stronger, or not anymore, but like we've been increasing in power over time. We are the dominant player, or at least we were as of before Trump got elected.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, everything's changing. But we were the dominant player. We don't... it doesn't make sense. Okay. Other main...
mythic past.
Yeah, hints mythic. Other main parts of fascism. It comes with hyper-hierarchical thinking. Everything's the hierarchy. It's all a triangle. You know the triangle graph? I'm gonna edit this part out. They're all somewhere tiered on that ranking, and there's a constant disdain for anyone below you on the ranking. So even if you're not on top, you get power and you get to exercise power on people below you, and that makes you feel good. There's
for everyone except who's on the very bottom of the bottom.
Yeah, the people on the bottom of the bottom, they're just screwed.
Yeah.
But if you're anywhere above them, you feel good by beating them up.
Yeah.
There's a lot of us versus them thinking because of that. And like you mentioned at the bottom, they start at the bottom and work their way up. So they'll start with stripping rights and killing people on the very bottom of the social hierarchy, and then they'll move up and up and up and up and up. Another interesting way to think about it is it's often been described as colonialism brought home, where you take that dehumanization and that stripping of rights that colonial powers often do to other groups when they're invading, and you apply that to your own citizenry, and you apply that to yourself. Yeah. All right, y'all. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments, and we'll read over them in our next episode.
Follow DSA Upstate on Instagram and Twitter. X, if we have an X.
We have a Blue Sky.
On Instagram and Blue Sky and Facebook and and all that, all the social medias.
All the social medias.
Keep tuned or stay posted for
like and subscribe to hear our next episode.
Yeah, stay posted for episodes and stay posted for protests you can get involved in.
Yeah, especially if you're here in the Upstate. We love to meet you and reach out to you. Yeah, we're great at this.
Stay involved.
Yeah.
Bye, y'all.
Don't get hopeless. Nihilism's for losers.